We got ourselves a little bit of Conference USA and Sun Belt crossover action in the Atlanta metro area. Arkansas State making their way down to Georgia and looking to play against the Kennesaw State Owls, making their second year at the FBS level. A battle that's going to take place at Fifth Third Stadium out in Kennesaw, Georgia, and it will be a 6 p.m. kickoff that's taking place on ESPN Plus. Now, both of these teams, you look at both of these teams' resumes over the course of the year, and really similar paths, right? Yes, both of these teams are 1-2 coming into the contest, but you really take a hard look at both of these teams' resumes, and both of these teams have similar paths so far, right? Both teams come in with an FBS win, followed by 2 losses against Power Conference opponents, but those Power Conference losses, one of them was legitimately competitive for both teams. Kennesaw State, back in week number 1, actually was very close to pulling that upset off against Wake Forest. You know, they only lost by 1 point in a very excruciating defensive contest. Whereas for Arkansas State, yes, they were blown out by Arkansas a couple of weeks ago, but just this past week, you know, we see them go toe-to-toe against the Iowa State team that's ranked, by the way, at home. And Iowa State, you know, had some fits. You know, they had some trouble. So, you know, Iowa State was able to eke it out. But Arkansas State, you know, really saw a defense that has been really inconsistent this past year. You know, even with a solid defensive performance for the Red Wolves, this is still a team that's, you know, allowing an average of 35 points a game. But even with the loss, you could really see the confidence of this Arkansas State team growing. And this is certainly a team that's going to be dangerous offensively, right? You know, a lot of talk is going to be centered around Jalen Rayner, for example. But he's got a deep group of receivers as well to throw the ball to. One of the best offenses as Butch Jones has to work with during his tenure at Arkansas State. So he has that going in his favor. Now, as for Kennesaw State, we saw them get blown out by Indiana this past week. So, you know, maybe not carrying that same confidence, but again, you know, carrying that same resume, per se, right? As Jerry Mack is, you know, he's trying to help this Kennesaw State team really find its footing at the FBS level. We saw them struggle sensationally in year number 1. But at the same time, you know, you can tell that, you know, this team is a little bit better coached than maybe last year, right? You know, because this defense, you know, returns like several of its starters, and Kennesaw State, not as many people talked about them because of how bad they were, but, you know, they were in that top 10 to top 15 in terms of returning production. So the offense has still struggled. It struggled in the Indiana game. It struggled in the Wake Forest game, and especially trying to get production through the passing attack. But, you know, you could also tell at the same time that this Kennesaw State team is at least better than I think it was last year. I think it's still going to take a year or two for Kennesaw to get used to FBS football. And that's always going to be a huge transition, particularly in the trenches. So that's just something to keep in mind. But even with that, I still think that this is going to be a competitive game, because of the fact this game is going to be happening at home. Now, well, it's not just because I think that, but, you know, let's go ahead and pull up our model real quick. And actually, both FanDuel and our internal metrics are actually pretty in line here. So, as we're recording this video right now, FanDuel has this as a 6.5 point favorite for Arkansas State, but our internal model is about on the same page here, right? You're looking at a like a 6-point favorite, so essentially the same thing. Since we've seen both teams being able to compete against a power conference opponent, I think that it's not only going to be a fun game to watch, but I think this should be a highly competitive game that, you know, it does have some shootout potential, you know, especially with Kennesaw State offense continuing to get better, even as they were getting their back blown out a couple of weeks ago by Indiana. But with that being said, I do think that Jalen Rayner in this offense, I think that's going to be a little too much to handle for the Owls, even in the safety and the comfort of their home building. So I do think that Kennesaw State, I think they do cover. I will lean towards the Owls covering, but I'm not going to go so far as to say that Kennesaw State is going to come out of this on top with a victory of their own. So we're going to go with Arkansas State winning, but it's going to be a 30-24 victory in favor of the Red Wolves. I think that defensive improvement still also happens under Butch Jones. And with that, they'll get back to 500. But Kennesaw State, to be fair to them, they do cover, and they'll still build a little bit of confidence as they now entrench themselves into Conference USA following this matchup.